On this edition of Southern Newsweek, the shift in election date is a boon for at least one 17-year-old. QR codes prove difficult to scan for people in wheelchairs. And an historic cottage is set to be added to Dunedin's Gasworks Museum. Kia ora, I'm Sophie Morris. Come election day, there will be at least one more city voter hitting the polling booth. A high school pupil is now set to celebrate her 18th birthday on October 17 by voting in the national election.
With New Zealand's national elections pushed back by 4 weeks, Otago Girls High School head girl Jennifer Marsh is eligible to vote as she turns 18 on the new election day.
I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I kind of put the idea of voting out of my mind, but now I actually have the opportunity.
Before yesterday's change to the election date, she'd been expecting not to get a chance to vote in the national election for another 3 years. But now she's going to have to do some research into which MP, which political party and which choices in the referenda she agrees with most.
I'm going to have to look into it. I'll listen to my parents, listen to my family, but at the end of the day it's going to be my decision.
And Jennifer says she's not the only one who unexpectedly will now get a chance to vote.
Yeah, definitely. We've been talking about it, especially this morning with the announcement, because me and quite a few of my friends are actually going to be old enough to vote now.
The national election and referenda are set for October the 17th, almost 2 months from now. In Dunedin, the South today.
From noon on Wednesday, it became compulsory for businesses and organisations to display a COVID-19 QR code to make contact tracing easier. Those not displaying their code face a $300 fine, and while anecdotally it seems compliance is high, placement of the signs is making life tough for some people.
Rolling into the office, Disability Service Educator John Marable scans into work for the day. While it's easy for him and other mobility vehicle users to register their QR codes on posters at this height, he says many businesses aren't taking wheelchair users into account.
So it means by the time I get there, get my phone out, unlock it, get the QR code up, then I can't reach the QR code if it's too high or might be stuck into a corner.
From noon today, it became a legal requirement for businesses and organisations to display COVID-19 tracking, QR or quick response codes. Earlier in the day, Marable says there haven't been any directives about how accessible the posters need to be.
Unfortunately, no one's come out with regards saying the QR codes must be mounted in such and such. So that's where we'd look at the building code and the various legislations, and they normally suggest between 900 and 1200.
At this afternoon's media briefing, Dr Ashley Bloomfield says the public is doing well with increasing mask use and using the NZ COVID Tracer app, though he's asking businesses to be mindful and place QR code posters where everyone can reach them.
Just a plea to businesses, remember the QR code needs to be accessible to people who may be in wheelchairs, so please make sure that there is a code that is no higher than 130 centimetres above the ground.
John Marable is asking people to be patient with these changes as we all get used to this new normal. He believes pinning them up about 1 metre to 1.5 metres high should suit people of all heights, along with maybe having a couple of posters people can scan.
I know at work we've got them 2 different heights, which is quite good, but a lot of businesses, they wouldn't have even thought about it. They've just been told they have to put this code up, so they're putting it up, and sometimes their displays may have so many different posters they're trying to find a space to put it.
The government legislation around displaying QR codes came into effect at noon, August the 19th. In Dunedin, the South today.
A Dunedin house dating back to the late 1800s will likely soon shift to its new home at the Gasworks Museum. The house is unique as it's one of the few surviving workers' cottages of that era.
Currently at Tuhuna Park, this historic workers' cottage from the late 1800s looks likely to move back to its original street and become part of Dunedin's Gasworks Museum.
It's now going to the Gasworks, which is where it belongs really, and the Gasworks Trust is keen to have it, and it will extend the interest of the gasworks, and it will show the domestic use of gas and the appliances, and then it's the link with Dunedin's social history.
Heritage campaigner Anne Barsby says the building's about 130 years old and is one of the last few remaining examples of a workers' cottage of that time. It's hoped the various rooms will be restored to show household appliances and fittings from different eras.
It started off as a little cottage with a little veranda, and then it was made into looking like a villa with its 2 bays, later on. So it shows the period of change too from, for domestic architecture, and it's very original in structure. And so we're planning to restore it to show these different eras of its life.
While the house was generously donated by its previous owner, Barsby has had to dip into her own pocket for about $14,000 worth of repairs, and there'll be more costs to turn it into a little museum at the old gasworks.
But we're both non-funded organisations and charitable trusts, so any funding that people would like to donate would be marvellous.
It's hoped resource consent to move the house to the Gasworks Museum will be granted in the next few months, with the City Council offering to help with the shift. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Port Chalmers fishermen have teamed up to help put meals on families' tables who are under pressure from COVID-19. The plan is to supply about 200 kilos of fish each month to Dunedin food banks.
Freshly caught fish are offloaded from the Port Chalmers Fishermen's Co-op fishing vessel, the Donna Marie, with some of the catch intended to be donated to local people in need. The idea of supplying fish as charity is something the Co-op's president, Ant Smith, has been trying to get going for some time.
How it works is the fisherman will donate some fish to the fishing company, and the company processes that fish and moves it on to the charities. We're going to supply the charities about 200 kilos of raw product per month.
Once landed, the fish are processed and frozen by local company Harbour Fish. And Smith says the idea relies on the generosity of those in the supply chain.
It appears to be difficult on the surface, but we've had great response from particularly the quota owners like Tallies and the processors like Harbour Fish, and their core to make this happen.
Smith's idea of making free fish available to those in need has got traction thanks to the economic impact of COVID-19, and he's hoping it will go further than just being a local initiative.
Well, we envision that this will just be ongoing. Obviously, when COVID's over, the need will be perhaps a wee bit less, but poverty in New Zealand is out there and it's real. We'd like to see this picked up by the other associations throughout the country.
Harbour Fish are planning to store the frozen fish and make it available to food banks as needed. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Still to come, the artworks of Colin McCann can be viewed in 2 unique exhibitions, and Otago Yacht Club celebrate the arrival of a new pontoon. Welcome back. The artworks of a celebrated New Zealand painter are on display in the Hocken Library. The 2 exhibitions cover much of the output of the artist Colin McCann, who grew up in Dunedin.
An in-depth look at the works of New Zealand artist Colin McCann is now on display in Dunedin's Hocken Library building. Entitled Colin McCann, A Constant Flow of Light, the exhibition's curator Robin Notman says it looks at how the artist used light in his paintings.
So if you look at the early selection of works in this room, that they date from the 30s and 40s, when he was experimenting with different artistic styles. And then by the 1940s you can see he develops a technique for incorporating light into his work, and also symbolically in the use of the lamp.
While the exhibition has some works loaned from elsewhere, most of the paintings are already in the Hocken collections, being housed in the town he grew up in.
He was born in Timaru, but basically was only there for a very short time, and he grew up in Dunedin and was educated here, and painted his incredible peninsula landscapes and had his visions about his art here, and basically lived in Dunedin until the 40s.
Part of the gallery's space shows Colin McCann's illustration of a poem by New Zealand writer John Castleberg, who was a proponent of the arts.
From memory, I think the two men met in Christchurch originally, but certainly Castleberg was again a major collaborator with McCann in terms of the thinking about art and the life of the artist and the things that you should be interested in. And there are also these works like The Wake, which is a Castleberg poem which has been painted by McCann, and it's designed as a room installation, and the poem and other poems were read with those works.
The Hocken exhibition ties in with another McCann exhibition at the Dunedin Public Art Gallery, and Notman says lovers of McCann's works can also stroll to the University of Otago to admire a McCann mural on permanent display at the Central Library.
So people could either start here or at the gallery and then go, and visit the University of Otago Library mural on their way.
The Hocken's Colin McCann exhibition is set to run until March next year. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Members of the Otago Yacht Club are celebrating the arrival of a sustainable pontoon. Original estimates had the project costing more than $100,000, but thanks to some generous people, it's set to cost a fraction of that.
After a year and a half of research, planning and negotiation, Otago Yacht Club's new pontoon floats into position.
2 years ago we were doing some dredging and we sunk one of our pontoons. The insurance paid out on that, and we've been doing some pricing for the last 18 months on what to do.
The Yacht Club's Barry Gibbs says the new pontoon was installed yesterday and was expected to cost more than $100,000. But the club found a creative solution involving old crane legs.
We approached Port Otago to find out what they're going to do with them, and the end result was that they donated them to us.
Gibbs says the club is grateful to Port Otago for the donation of the legs, which were then taken to Dunedin's Action Engineering to be welded into a watertight pontoon. He says necessity was the main reason they arranged to get the pontoon made.
Basically why we need more pontoonages over the summer period. We get a lot of visitors from all around New Zealand, overseas and everything, to come and stay here, and it becomes a real shortage berthage because there's nothing else in Dunedin.
He says spending around $35,000 on the pontoon is just affordable for the club without them having to apply to funding organisations. The pontoon isn't the only major purchase for Otago Yacht Club, as the organisation has also been buying more sailing vessels.
Because we've spent a lot of money, we've brought some a new rescue boat last week, and and we've brought some what they call open class skiffs, which a lot of people probably know them as the Bics. We've brought 6 of them for the youth sailing and for sailing school to get going this year. So yeah, we're really spent a bit of money around the place, which is really good.
Gibbs says sailing isn't quite as popular as it was during its heyday, but is increasing in popularity. And the club is focusing on encouraging younger sailors. In Dunedin, the South Today.
The odds are in your favour when 46 of the greyhounds racing are your own. On Wednesday, Canterbury trainer John McInerney won the majority of races at the first Forbury Park race meeting in Dunedin since lockdown.
Greyhound racing came back to Dunedin's Forbury Park yesterday for the first time since a COVID-19 lockdown in March, with Canterbury trainer John McInerney winning 6 of the 10 races. But the high number of wins wasn't a surprise, with McInerney having driven down from Christchurch with 48 dogs that morning.
We started this morning at 3 a.m, got up and fed them. They're all rugged at night, so the rugs come off and fed them, and they get a quick pee and we load them up, and we stop at the Bryden and Oamaru for a feed for ourselves. The dogs stop a few times and get out for a walk. And yeah.
He says it's a shame the Forbury track hasn't been used more since lockdown, as it's considerably safer for the dogs sprinting around the track.
And we used to come here at least once a fortnight, so yeah, pretty sad. It's a really good track, safe. At Christchurch I'll probably get 10% of my dogs get hurt, whereas around here be lucky to get 1%, and it's normally a bad surface at Christchurch compared to the 2 southern tracks, which are really, really safe tracks to race.
Back at home he has about 150 greyhounds to be looked after, with the dogs undergoing regular health checks.
The dogs get out twice a day, every day. In the morning and the afternoon. They're fed twice a day. And I have staff. I've got a staff of 6. Normally try and match like one person to 20 dogs. And I've got 3 people full-time just ultrasounding, lasering, checking the dogs, just preparing them, keeping them going for each race meeting.
McInerney says many retired greyhounds become his pets, while some others are rehomed. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A Wanaka-based photographer has travelled extensively in search of capturing the perfect photograph. He grew up in the American state of Colorado, beginning his travels in Europe and Asia before settling in Aotearoa.
Capturing a perfect moment in time is the aim of photographer Corey Marshall.
The first camera that I pretty much got right before I left on like a 1.5-year traveling trip. And so I pretty much saved money. And then after I graduated university, I was going to take 6 months and travel through Europe. And then about 1.5 years, almost 2 years later, I finally came home. And so I spent about 5 months in Europe, and then I moved to Southeast Asia and lived in Thailand for almost a year, teaching scuba diving, but taking photos as well.
To achieve that elusive shot, Marshall is willing to wait in the wind, snow and rain.
And instead of going out and hiking up a mountain, I was going out at different times of day, hiking up the mountain and taking sunset photos, and then hiking back down in the dark or camping out for a couple days waiting for the right sunset or just the right light.
He uses editing software to create the perfect photo, but his aim is not to deceive.
Your eyes are so much better than a camera. So like in order to make a photo how you want it to look or how you saw it at the time, it needs a decent amount of manipulation in it. And so I try and make the photos pretty much relatively what I saw.
He preserves his photos by printing them onto metal.
A lot of people haven't seen it before, and so they are just amazed at how clear it is and like how sharp the pictures are. But then at the same time, you tell them the process and how it goes from a solid to a gas and then back into a solid, and I still think it's magic. Like I don't understand how it stays so sharp when it's like changing states. But yeah, so I've had quite a lot of good feedback on people that have bought them and have them hanging in their house now.
In Wanaka for the South Today.
Still to come, a UK tourist stranded in Dunedin makes the most of his situation, and a psychologist gives advice for coping with the new normal. Welcome back. When UK resident David Hay flew to Dunedin for a summer holiday last November, he didn't imagine he'd still be here now. Making the most of his time stuck in New Zealand, he's become a regular at a local golf course.
Thanks to flight cancellations and border restrictions, retired UK businessman David Hay has had an unexpected extension to his summer holiday in Dunedin.
By March, when we were supposed to be going back via Australia to the UK, of course they closed their borders, so we were stuck. And our visas ran out in May, but fortunately the New Zealand immigration people extended the visa until the 25th of September.
But he says he and his wife are not minding the enforced extension to their time here, with him regularly playing at Dunedin's Balmacewen golf course.
Winter here this time in New Zealand has been particularly mild compared to anything we would get in the winter in Britain.
However, Hay says time is now running out on their already extended visas.
So technically we had an automatic extra 4 months. As we are now in August, of course, we're getting worried that the 25th of September is looming fairly quickly, and we still have no notification from New Zealand immigration as to what they would like us to do. So right now we're facing the prospect of having to go home in September.
Hay says the risk of being infected with COVID-19 during the journey home is a genuine concern.
and that means flying at least 4 occasions. So managing to avoid any contamination from COVID under those circumstances is the big worry that we have. We're not too worried about going back to the UK. We can isolate for a fortnight, we can quarantine, and where we are in the area that we are has been fairly COVID-free.
Hay believes he and his wife are just 2 of some 50,000 visitors currently in New Zealand on temporary visas, who will ultimately return to their homes when it's safe to do so. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Budding and established artists across New Zealand have been invited to design a poster that fights racism. The competition was created following concerns of racism during this year's COVID-19 crisis.
Artist Bruce Mahalski is inviting people across New Zealand to design a poster that fights the current trend of racism, both online and in public.
What we're looking for is posters that celebrate sort of cultural diversity, anti-racist, particularly as it relates to the local Chinese Kiwis who have been, I think, hardest hit by racism in New Zealand.
There are 3 categories in the competition: juniors, for those between 13 and 17 years of age, and adults as either beginners or established artists. There is also a popular vote category. The 4 winners will get a cash prize, a trip to Wellington, and will have their poster displayed across New Zealand.
And so we're hoping there's some people out there who can really, come up with a cracking anti-racist sort of cultural diversity poster that celebrates why a multicultural society is great in New Zealand and why we don't need any racism.
The poster promoting the competition was drawn by Dunedin cartoonist Veronica Brett, who is already working on her second book of cartoons, which explore the outer psyche. Mahalski has some advice on how to create a poster that stands out.
So a good poster to me is one that it's got a very strong message to it, and it's got as few words as possible. I think so many posters today are overloaded, they're overcooked by Photoshop. And black and white, can be great. It doesn't need to be in colour. I use a lot of black and white myself. And also symmetry is so important in a good poster. It really has to be symmetrical to attract the eye to it.
Entries to the Aotearoa poster competition close in a month's time. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A petition signed by 1,700 people looks to have saved Wanaka's lakefront Millennium Walkway tiles. The pathway was under threat from proposed redevelopment of the Roy's Bay lakefront.
This pathway along the picturesque Wanaka lakefront is possibly more appreciated by the public than the Queenstown Lakes District Council realised. Stretching more than half a kilometre with 2,000 tiles, several marking important dates in the world, New Zealand and Wanaka history, the pathway seemed under threat from being discarded by the council. However, a petition signed by more than 1,700 people seems to have safeguarded the path from a planned redevelopment of Roy's Bay lakefront. The path had not been upgraded, with 17 broken tiles having to be replaced. The Queenstown Lakes District Council has put out 2 options for public comment, with concept plans to be on display at the lakefront this Saturday morning. In Wanaka, the South Today.
A leading mental health researcher says an outbreak of COVID-19 may challenge New Zealanders at a time when they are already under strain. The country was put into level 2 COVID-19 restrictions this week, with level 3 in Auckland when a family of 4 tested positive.
The emotional stress of the first COVID-19 lockdown is currently putting a severe strain on the mental health system.
Mental health was quiet initially following it, but 6 to 8 weeks post, everything went the exact opposite. We are very busy at the moment. We are also very short of resources at the moment.
New Zealand had just passed 100 days without community transmission of the virus until this week, when a cluster of 4 people tested positive, prompting a return to social distancing and lockdowns. Dr. Chris Gale says there are things people can do to check in and support their own mental health.
And actually saying what were the things that really truly helped us last time around. So it might be putting the teddy bears in the window help the kids. It might be going for a walk, it might be playing board games, it might be doing exercises to a video, it might be playing music, it might be listening to Blur.
Many New Zealanders embraced the challenges and united to defeat the first wave of COVID-19, but they may have to face a second wave when their emotional reserves are depleted. Dr. Gale says it's indicative of the whole mental health sector.
We don't have a huge service. We are doing the best we can. We're trying to see as many people as we can. We're trying to help as many people as we can. This is a crisis, and sometimes it goes fantastic and sometimes it does not go fantastic.
He's one of 4 senior clinicians at the Southern District Health Board, leading a team of around 30 plus practitioners and other staff, including PDNs or psych district nurses. He says he has a huge admiration for those working at the industry's coalface and in the social services sector.
I've got a huge respect for the staff who are doing budgeting advice at Salvation Army and the Anglican Family Care. I've got a huge amount of respect for the ministers of religion.
This afternoon, Director General of Health Dr Ashley Bloomfield announced 13 more cases of COVID-19, including 3 at an Auckland cool store at the centre of this week's outbreak, with all of those affected going into quarantine. In Dunedin, the South Today.
That's all for this edition of Southern Newsweek. For the latest news from the Southern region, head online to odt.co.nz or follow Channel 39 on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for joining us. Ka kite anō.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.